Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone had a nice lunch. My name's Josh Jabal. I'm the Managing Director of Yale Ventures. Just a quick introduction to myself. So I'm a Yale College and Yale SOM grad. Spent most of my career in the tech industry, 11 years at IBM, left to become the CEO of a software startup company doing scientific data management, which we grew, venture-backed, and ultimately acquired by Thermo Fisher Scientific, so another Fortune 100 company. This is a theme we'll be talking about today. And then kind of after working for Thermo Fisher for a little while, shifted into the giving back phase of my career, which included working for Connecticut's Governor Ned Lamont for a period of time as the state's chief operating officer. And then almost 4 years ago, returning to Yale to take on this role as a deputy provost or the senior associate provost for entrepreneurship and innovation. And we launched Yale Ventures as the umbrella organization across Yale to support innovators, entrepreneurs, our students, our faculty, and the broader community that's all looking to take the brilliance that Yale is able to assemble and develop and turn it into real-world impact and help address the big challenges we're facing in the world. And we're going to talk about some of those challenges today. I'm going to let our panel introduce themselves in just a moment, but just to set the stage, the goal of this panel is to really explore the opportunities and challenges that exist as leaders across all sectors, academia, private sector, public sector, work to deal with the threats and challenges that the climate crisis is presenting to every enterprise and every organization, and think about the ways that we can all work together more effectively, and examples that have worked well to think about how we manage these threats, whether it's climate change or ecosystem degradation, water availability, and all of the associated impacts on the communities that we all live in. Yale Ventures and Yale Planetary Solutions, which Julie leads, and you'll hear much more about today, are working within the university to really help elevate the impact that Yale is able to have in these areas. And just a couple of examples of new things that we are either just launched or just about to launch. Just within the last couple of weeks, we announced the launch of the Yale Planetary Solutions Impact Accelerator, which is the latest in the portfolio of accelerator programs that we run that are domain specific, so in this case focused on planetary solutions, that support the translation and commercialization of faculty research discoveries that have the potential to attract investment and be scaled up to have a positive impact on the climate crisis. And so if you follow what's going on at Yale, you will have seen some announcements about that. There'll be a lot more information coming in the coming weeks, and we are excited about the potential there to launch new startup companies and new corporate partnerships in the years to come. In addition, we're getting very close to announcing the Yale Planetary Solutions Catalyst Consortium, which is really the host of today's session, and which is being organized by the Yale Ventures Corporate Strategy and Engagement team, led by Kathy Lynch, who's in here somewhere. And the goal of this group will be to bring together, there's Kathy, and the goal of the consortium will be to bring together industry partners and academics to work on a pre-competitive basis on ideas, technologies, research that can really make a difference in this area. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and Julie will share more details about that as we get towards the end. So we're really grateful to have a number of leaders with us today to contribute to this conversation. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and Kai, we can start with you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Kai Chen, Associate Professor at the Yale School of Public Health. I study climate change in the health. I also have the pleasure to serve as the Faculty Director at the Yale Center on Climate Change and Health.
Hi there. I'm Brian Story. I'm with Toyota. Specifically, I'm the Vice President of the Energy Materials Group at Toyota Research Institute. Prior to Toyota, I was a professor of engineering for 16 years, so I've seen both sides of the industry and academia collaboration.
I had no idea. That's awesome. So I'm also a professor of engineering. I'm Julie Zimmerman. When I'm not being an engineer, I'm in the provost's office at Yale running Planetary Solutions, which is Yale's effort really to engage on these topics around climate and sustainability. I am an entrepreneur. I have several startup companies that have come out and work really, really closely with industry to scale solutions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Jacobs. I'm the head of social innovation at IBM. I'm on the corporate social responsibility team. We're the philanthropic arm of the company, and so also known as the Chief Impact Office. Good to be with you.
Great, thanks everybody. Julie, I'm going to start with you. It would be great if you could expand a little bit more than you just did on Yale's approach to planetary solutions, and in particular, how we've been looking to collaborate with industry and to advance our work.
Yeah, so Yale Planetary Solutions started actually in the science strategy for the university about 5 years ago. And as it has grown, it's become really evident that this isn't just about science, it's also about business and communications and social science and humanists and artists and health. And so the initiative got a lot bigger and went up to the provost's office. And then it became really clear, too, it's not just about scholarship and research, but it's about how we're training leaders and what Yale itself is doing in terms of powering our campus, how we build buildings, how we feed 10,000 people a day. And so it keeps getting bigger until we wind up in places like this, where we need to have conversations about how we bring what Yale has to offer and then find partners and stakeholders who can help scale that out into the real world and off of campus to have impact. One of the things that's become really evident is we have a lot of faculty and students who are really interested in having that scale and impact, but it's really hard for us to know on campus sometimes what's really relevant, what are the real challenges, what's the timeline of which a partner might need to have this solution. And so helping our research community get oriented really early to make sure the work we're doing is relevant and that handoff, that translation, that transformation can happen, shorten the time horizon from idea to impact out in the real world.
That's great. Maybe, Brian, we can go to you. It'd be great to hear the industry side of this. Why is collaboration with academia important to Toyota? I know you've done a lot in this area.
Yes, I guess just as a little background, over the past 8 years, our group, just specifically our company even more, but about $60 million in work we've funded at universities around the country. And that's mostly, at least in this program, been technical work focused on new technology and new materials for cells and so forth, type technologies. I think for those kind of problems, we see a lot of value, at least in certain problems for working with universities, because there's certain strengths that universities have that companies can't replicate. One just being the constant influx of young creative talent that you attract from around the world, being graduate students that fortunately for us aren't very expensive to fund, being able to work with, identify, we need very particular expertise, particular problems, we can identify those people, and so kind of leveraging the strengths of what universities do. Now, there's things companies do better, and so I think that's really a key in setting up successful partnerships is finding those, leveraging each other's strengths and finding things that the university can't, and vice versa. Paying attention to those strengths and weaknesses that we both can bring.
Maybe just to push on that a little bit further, there are some examples that come to mind over the $60 million you've spent in academic collaborations, some of the areas that you've observed common themes about how to get those collaborations to work the best in terms of what you do and what they do and what works and what doesn't work.
Yes, I mean, maybe this is getting a little down in the technical weeds, but we've worked a lot on new materials for things like fuel cells and hydrogen electrolyzers, so these rely on rare on this planet, so like iridium, which is one of the most expensive metals. So it's been a long scientific challenge to try to crack that code. So we've worked with a couple schools and specifically at Northwestern developing new technology for searching for new materials and been, I think, fairly successful with that. But those aren't commercialized yet, right? And so that's where a company like Toyota can take over and can't do. So we have decades of experience of worrying about all these issues of, well, how are you going to make it? How are you going to make it at scale? We sell 10 million cars a year, so you have to make things at sort of an enormous scale, and a company can be quite good at that. So it's really kind of identifying where's those nuggets, the early stage research that we can. And I think the other important thing is a company, when you work with a university, you have to sort of appreciate the bargain you're striking, right? Like it's always very hard to trace down some tangible ROI or return on investment of research in general, let alone with a university. So it's never this straight line that, that, thing there led to this dollar down the road. And so you kind of have to accept that a lot of the benefits are these intangible relationships, the people, the networks, the kind of advancing the science, that you're paying for things that pay off in a way, but it's hard to quantify.
That's great. Michael, maybe we can go to you, and we'd love to hear your perspective on how IBM thinks about your academic collaborations. I know there's an awful lot to talk about there.
Well, it would be much the same as the perspective that we just heard. I would provide another example for context of how we work with universities to get into community. We have a pretty big portfolio around agriculture, sustainable agriculture being relevant here. And the land-grant university system in the United States has a longstanding model in extension services. So these are recognized subject matter experts, often with government funding, who are employed by the universities and sent literally out into the field to interact with farmers and other members of these communities. So that is by design a hub for this research where IBM researchers can come to a university lab and interact with the people who are co-creating new technologies, new methodologies, publishing about them, getting scientific feedback, and then plug into a university sanctioned system to actually implement those insights or that tech. That's something that IBM just doesn't have. That's not how our sales system is designed. And in particular for work like mine, which is often at the nexus of social impact and research, it's really critical to find those opportunities where there's not that near-term profit motive. That's something unique universities can provide.
Great. Maybe just I'll open this up to the whole panel. Anyone would like to comment, but it would be good to hear everyone's perspective about the biggest barriers that prevent more collaboration between academia and industry, and any thoughts about how those barriers can be addressed and removed.
I will start. So I think the focus is kind of slightly different. At least in academia, what we get incentive for, and what as a early career faculty for the tenure promotion, what the value is. We conduct hypothesis-driven research, aiming to fill the knowledge gap, and this most often has, as mentioned, is basic research. Does not have immediate translational impact yet. So what we do is, a lot of work is try to publish papers, but not many people actually read the papers other than the reviewer, the editor, maybe probably one or two other people read the full paper. So we at the Center on Climate Change House, we think this a lot. We try to think how can we translate the research into the actual real world impact. But this is super hard because there's no strong incentive structure in all the universities try to achieve that. I think one of the ways to do that is actually because the mission, what in the universities, in the center, in the researchers, we are aimed to build a more healthier, more sustainable, more resilient future. This goal is a shared common ground, and with that, if we're achieving that future, we're going to provide a very stable, not only stable future to save lives, to save ecosystem, but also stable environment for the economy. And as we have heard last night during the wonderful panel discussion, Congressman raised the question that actually the stability is something, a common ground for the private sector and the researchers and different people with different values can work together. So I think maybe starting from these kind of common grounds, especially for us, find the place that our hypothesis-driven research aiming for knowledge gap that can be aligned with some of the part that can generate more real-world impacts. I think that will be the way to go, and that's why I'm super excited to see actually YPS is moving towards direction, utilizing all Yale's resources to do that.
I'll pick up on the theme of shared common ground. IBM's been a leader in the open source movement as long as this has been a concept. So particularly around technology innovation, there are established roadmaps and ecosystems for showing your work. This is an academic example of a lower regard than Yale University, but literally publishing the architectures, the methodologies, sometimes even underlying source code for a solution enables people to collaborate on specific solutions, advance them, ideally not repeat work. And there's a long history of successful engagement between universities and the private sector, especially in technology here. IBM co-founded with Meta the AI Alliance, which includes dozens of universities focused on doing this for AI. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the sustainability space for us to be open sourcing work that we're doing and inviting collaboration from others.
I think one of the barriers as somebody who runs a lab is not always knowing clearly what's relevant or what needs are or what constraints might be. And so I think we're missing a vehicle to have this dialogue of here are the cool things we're working on, what resonates, and then hearing from industry for that pull, just so I can orient my research in a little bit a different direction than maybe I was heading because I have a better understanding of what's needed. And so I think creating that space where there's a way to engage, have conversation, and help folks in industry figure out Yale's a big place, it's really opaque, where's the front door? And it's matchmaking between expertise we might have on campus or in our network and what that company is looking for.
So Julie, I think of you as one of the most progressive faculty in terms of thinking about connecting your research to what is the real world impact going to be. But I think that's, in talking about Kai's discussion about incentives in the academy, right? Like that's not always the first thing our faculty, or not just at Yale, but in the academy generally, like they're thinking about. We have been doing a lot at Yale on incentives, I think, in this area, right? In terms of the patent policy and thinking about aligning the financial incentives with when there is success, commercial success, that it's aligned back to the inventors and the academic units where that came from. Some departments now starting to think about giving some credit for innovation, entrepreneurship in tenure and promotion cases, but that's not across the board. I mean, I would love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts about, is there more we as the academy should be doing, not necessarily just Yale, but to think about incentives and how those play into industry academic collaborations?
I think one of the things that we realize in tackling a lot of these problems is actually the advantage, the strength of the university has is all the amazing faculty in vast different disciplines. And let's just take flooding, for example. If we want to tackle flooding problem, the risk from flooding, you need engineers, right, to build the system to protect the flooding occurring. And once you have flooding, you need environmental engineer to provide safe, clean drinking water, right? And then you also need epidemiologists and working with climate scientists to actually tell you where these the most vulnerable people will be, and can build some early warning system. Try to have early warning. That's the tragic story we saw early this year in Texas, because the early warning system does not work. So we have faculty at Yale working on actually partnering with companies, trying to kind of build and employ these early warning systems to local communities. So this is the type of work. But also we need economists working together and people from the management actually to look at all the supply chain. If you have a company, what are these major extreme weather events impacting? One example is in Hurricane Maria. A lot of the supplies in the hospital is actually manufactured in Puerto Rico, and because of the hurricane, that was create a major shortage. So I think to tackle this problem, it really needs a multidisciplinary collaboration, which by its nature, every faculty in each discipline are working on the problem they are mostly interested in is domain specific but siloed. So to create a structure that actually multiple discipline faculty can work together and have a dialogue and have deeper collaboration, I think that's the thing we need to do. And actually that's what exactly the Planet Solutions have been doing, using pilot projects and using different tiers from basic science research to more like applicable, innovative funds research. So I think that's something we're stepping ahead, but we need maybe accelerated steps.
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, we're happy to build more programs, and it's right becomes this resource question. So, I think that's something to think about. I think the other thing to think about, and this is probably provocative for a university, but we choose who our community is. And so not putting this filter at the end of saying, are you going to get tenure or not because you did something relevant or not, but put it at the front. And we're creating a community, I think, at Yale of people who want to be there, who want to have impact way beyond publishing. And if we create that culture, we're going to attract faculty who are going to want to be part of that, right? It's the if you build it, they will come. And I really, I mean, in my 18 years at Yale, from my first startup till now, the culture is wildly different. When I got there, innovation wasn't scholarly, and you couldn't teach entrepreneurship. And I mean, that was 18 years ago, and the university is totally different now, and I think people are starting to recognize that. So thanks to you.
That's great. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I feel like we still have a long way to go, but I love the thought. So great feedback. Brian, Michael, would love to hear from you too around your thoughts about this topic. Our faculty are often investigating the things that are of interest to them, right? And as Julie mentioned, there is a lot of value though in having the connections to what are the needs of industry, what are the real problems that you're facing that need to be solved, so that we can at least be informed of those as we're thinking about our research priorities. What advice do you have for us? Like, what can we do differently, better, to be connected to those industry needs?
I don't know. There's a magic solution here. I mean, part of it is, maybe this is just the Toyota in me, but a lot relies on personal relationships, a lot trust, and so that's a real, I think, kind of key component. Can't do that with everybody, right? When I think about when we're starting any kind of collaborations with universities, I always try to put myself back in my mind of the other side of it, and understand that there are certain incentives and structures, and that you're not going to change those, at least from the outside. You have to make sure you're aware of them and work with them, right? And so, some postdocs come in 2 and 4 year time scales that fit well. There's certain incentives to, a student needs to finish their PhD, so they can't work on things that are too proprietary. So it has to be things that we're okay with being open source. So you just have to really, at least that's what I try to do, is understand both the incentives and make sure that we're aligned in picking problems where it's appropriate and not every. We don't want to be open. Better, frankly, that's identifying those places where not only the strengths and weaknesses partners, but those incentives really align, and that you're not trying to work against them and pretend they aren't there. And I think the other is, you brought up this thing about coming to industry about what's relevant, but we also like coming to you about what we're not thinking about, right? Because that's like a key thing with universities. We can de-risk things. We can very cheaply, relatively speaking, from us hiring a whole group, building a whole infrastructure, explore something that might be a little bit out there. So that's, I think, a key thing you don't want to give up on. And also, or at least things are always successful if it's also not sort of a push or pull, but a collaboration, right? So if it's work on this problem, it never works. But if it's something that they're an expert on and are excited about, then that partnership is much stronger, because it's exciting for us, but for the professor as well.
It's a great perspective. We get a lot of inbound in our tech transfer office with new discoveries, and it's like, look at this amazing thing. This is going to be the next unicorn company, and it's like, well, let's think about this. This is a great solution, but what is the problem we're really trying to solve here? And
this is a little bit maybe off, but you brought up this question of IP and patents and things like that, and you're talking about barriers. The one barrier is if the office at the university believes that they're going to get money from any of these things ever and holds up contract negotiations. So we will walk at some point, because no one ever makes money from the patents.
Well, that's definitely not true, actually. maybe
Sorry.
in
in Toyota, like we never end up like licensing. So they're always jointly held, but
okay, yeah. So it's
to
joint
kind of
IP.
think that you're
sure.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's just a statement that we haven't discovered something together that's sufficiently disruptive and valuable enough yet. So that's a challenge. We'll take that as a challenge. But we do actually, like all universities, and actually under federal law, we're obligated to take the research that's supported with federal funding to try to seek opportunities to license that out, generate returns for that can be recycled into the research enterprise that funds more research, and certainly Yale benefits from that, as all of our peers do.
I'll just say quickly that at IBM, I run a program also called the IBM Impact Accelerator. So curious to see that brand get used. Well done.
We didn't steal the name, I promise.
We have a patent for that. We are entering into grant agreements, so these are pro bono projects that are a mix of IBM owns the IP, the university or a grantee owns the IP, or it's shared IP. And we have seen some commercialization. Just to provide one other thought on this opportunity set here, I think coming with a customer doesn't mean that you need to have the market fully developed. That's not the mission of the university, but understanding actually how the innovation coming out of a university lab could be applied is really interesting. Certainly a company like IBM or Toyota is going to understand many markets, but not necessarily in the community where the university is or along the line of thinking of what that researcher had. So coming with a user-centered design approach for who are you building for, who might be early adopters, even if they're not paying for it, that's going to make a real difference. And in the IBM Impact Accelerator, where we've selected universities, and we've done this all over the world on agriculture and energy and water and cities and supply chains, when a university was selected over a government partner or over a nonprofit, it was because the university had a market, knew who users would be, and had connections. That means we can hit the ground running together.
That's really interesting. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit more, because this is something I know we struggle with a lot, right? Is trying to think about what are those real world applications for some new chemical catalyst or some new discovery that's come out of our labs. Often, we can look at it and say, this is novel, this is really interesting, but what are the uses? And often we would turn to companies like IBM and just think about, can you help us think this through? I understand the benefits of if we've already figured it out, that's the best, but we may have blind spots too. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about in some of those environments, how you work with those or those academic partners to really flesh that out if it's not fully developed yet.
And the expectation isn't that the university comes knowing the entirety of the market. You guys would have commercialized and made a ton of money off of it if you did. But what it is saying is that we understand the real world use and opportunity for what we've been working on. We've had that validated by this external expert who says that they would implement it as a part of their own work. So for example, I gave the extension services example in agriculture of how universities are often working in community. With Texas A&M University, we've built a tool called VEXA, that's the Virtual Extension Assistant, where the university has gone to conservation commissions in Texas and Oklahoma and water and land managers in those same places and said, could you use this tool for decision support around land and water use? And had early, maybe, or we'll try. And that means that they understand that there's a market for what they've asked us for. In this instance, it was a digital or virtual assistant for interacting with a literature library around soil and water management best practices. And they wanted to extend access to that great research that they were doing, and they knew who they were trying to reach. They didn't come and say, we have these 100 people lined up who will pay $20 a month for it, but they had people that we could test with, who could provide real feedback with, and that was a really good indication for who we'd be building together for.
Interesting. Julia, Kai, I'd love to hear your reactions to this thought. It's often, we struggle with this, right? Is thinking this through on the front end before we start collaborating with industry. What do you think about this?
I think this goes back to what you were saying, and not that we don't want blue sky and big ideas. That's what, right? I think that's one of the strengths of the university. And so it's not you coming and saying, here's the solution, can you figure this out? But it's coming and saying, here's the problem. You tell us all the difference, we've worked on this solution, but we don't know about what's over here, and giving faculty room to do that. And I think when you start from what's the problem out there, you have already identified, the company has already identified there's an opportunity here, and so we're already in a funnel that's leading to something. I think when we imagine what the problems are, we suspect, I don't know that we always articulate them in the best way, and they're not always refined enough to be and have that relevance.
I would say one of the biggest risks for academia for the solving problems and not talking to industry is often we've solved them already and haven't told anyone, or or we tried and gave up, and yeah. So there's actually I've been surprised at how many times I realize how deep the bench is in a company like Toyota or IBM. So yeah, that part is important too.
That's great. I was joking earlier about the economics of the licensing process and so forth, but I should clarify that we at least at Yale, our primary goal has nothing to do with the money, and this is all about impact. It's all about trying to have as large a positive impact for humanity as we possibly can. And at least in the almost 4 years I've been here, a license has never gotten in the way of that discussion and that collaboration with a startup company or a large enterprise like IBM or Toyota. And if it ever does, someone needs to let me know, because we'll solve that problem very quickly. We're going to go to questions from the audience in just a moment here, so start queuing them up. But I would. This is like really the theme of the panel, so I would love to just press on this a little bit more. Other strategies, ideas, blue sky, thinking about how we can continue to evolve, our mindset from problem definition towards solution deployment, and really thinking about, how we develop these solutions that, can really have that real world impact, leveraging the incredible strength of the research enterprise at a place like Yale.
I think that's why we needed the Catalyst Consortium. That's exactly where the problem with talking about it, there's no much conversation between the private sector and the academia research space. What's the needs from both sides? What's the strengths we can collaborate together? So actually, that's why when Julie asked me to be on the consortium, I'm super excited, because I study the health impacts of climate change and how to address climate change by strengthening adaptive capacity. So for example, we study things like, we know air conditioning works, but how much air conditioning actually is protective from reducing heat-related illnesses. We see evidence that heat-related mortality across the United States, about 5,000 per year. That's our estimates. And we see actually majority of the mortality heavy burden is not from south, because that's hot place. You already have a lot of air conditioning, your lifestyle adjusted. But in places, for example, in New Haven, for example, in Washington State, that you don't have much air conditioning. So the usage is one thing, the use air conditioning. And then the second thing is a lot of, when you have excessive access and usage of air conditioning, it does not provide additional health benefits. So there's a lot of nuances in terms of how do we employ the one solution that everybody know it works in real life, in real society. So I think there's a lot of way, actually, when we're going from idea generation to impact, we know one solution is effective, but we don't know in real world when you implement, how effective that will be to achieving the goal. I think a lot of research actually needs to be done in that area, and that cannot be done, as we discussed in this panel, with the researchers ourselves, because we only in our own lab in doing a lot of the work, but I think partner with private sectors, leveraging the enormous platform and the audience, all the users you have been able to, that can just really release a lot of huge potentials that we can do. One example I want to give is in China, the Alibaba is a big e-commercial company. So researchers work with them. They have the Chinese version of Uber Eats, and they add a little bit like a question when you select a delivery. And if you add a question about how much of carbon footprint, how much of plastic it generates, and users tend to use less of this delivery or use less of the plastic. So they did a real-world RCT by collaborating with this e-commercial company, did a nationwide study and found some tiny, but if applied to population level, huge benefits to reducing the carbon, to reduce plastic uses, and then eventually achieve public health benefits. So I think that's the way that actually we can all work together. But that was less, focused on.
I mean, I think the other opportunity in the way to build the Catalyst Consortium and industrial roundtables I've been involved with is what are those pre-competitive needs where companies aren't worried about IP, but we all need to get to, in my world, this platform molecule, or we all have to separate these two things. And then we can take that idea and go diversify it inside. So finding pre-competitiveness, and then I think also looking at places where there's cross-sector opportunities. So I've done work in cosmetics and I've done work with beverage companies, and at the end of the day, they both sell goo in plastic bottles. And you wouldn't think they'd have a lot in common on the surface, but when you come to that level, they really do. And so, they're not competing with each other, but they have a packaging issue they both need to solve. And so I think finding those niches where it's pre-competitive, where there's cross-sector collaboration that might not happen from an individual company, but a university like Yale can convene those kinds of conversations.
For a company, the good thing is for us is there's infinite choice because there's I don't know how many schools around the world. For you, that means you have to find out how you're going to be different or differentiate. Why would we come here versus the 20 similar sounding things at MIT alone and Stanford alone? I went to UT Austin, so I would rather go there. Places. Any of the Longhorns out there? There we go, one. But kind of finding what's the thing that you're better at than others. What's the kind of unique value you bring, and whether that's through the people you have, or maybe the industries or companies that are close by to you, so you can build those strong relationships nearby. Whatever you're going to leverage. But you kind of have to pick your thing and do it well, and not try to be all things to all people.
I think one key element of that is storytelling. You're talking about telling a differentiated story, and I think there's a lot of power in stories of universities and corporations working together. People are inspired by young people. So just for example, anytime you're able to do good work with great students who will be the future of the industry or the product or the university, I think is a great opportunity. There aren't many opportunities out there for corporations to work with universities on the full pipeline or full channel of, let's say, an undergraduate student coming in and building expertise and maybe matriculating to graduate school and seeing ideas all the way through. Universities and corporations have long collaborated on talent pipelines, but here we're talking about opportunities that are also product development or marketing. I think there's a lot of interest in this. And as IBM, I mean, as much as we talk about issues like sustainability or health in previous years, education and skills has always been the #1 social issue that we've focused on because it's the most relevant to our business. We're here to talk about business resiliency. Fundamentally, your workforce is where that resiliency comes from. So there's a lot of shared opportunity on channeling talent pipelines and telling compelling stories about how you're working together in those ways.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe just before we go to questions, Julie, I'd bring it back to you. And we've alluded to the Catalyst Consortium a few times. Do you want to expand, give people a little sneak preview of what we have in mind there and why we're so excited about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I dropped some hints already, but this really is this idea of starting these industrial conversations for Yale, creating that front door, creating these pre-competitive spaces, cross-sectoral spaces, bringing all of the expertise of the university. We frame this around resiliency and thinking about resiliency in lots of different ways, whether it's community resiliency and license to operate, and what does it mean to be embedded in a community where your workforce is coming from, where your factories or manufacturing or data centers are located. We've thought about it from natural resource resiliency, water, and what you need in terms of natural capital and feedstocks. And then the last one's really around operational resiliency. So that is questions like, what does the supply chain look like? What does the electricity grid look like? And we feel like we have depth and expertise that differentiates Yale in those domains, and faculty from across the university, as Kai was alluding to. And so this is our launch of really trying to invite companies to work with us to design this, and then really build relationships in the name of having impact.
So if that sounds of interest to any of you, come find Kathy and Julie, myself, any of our team. We'd love to talk to you about it. So we can open it up to questions from there. Anyone, any questions in the audience?
Hi, and thank you for all your insights. One question I kind of have is, when I think about the research and the work that I do, it feels very natural to think about the benefits. Or to me, I think of the interests I think that I bring. I think of maybe even the greater good. But when making the business case for it, I find that comes less natural. And I've had a similar conversation with many others who also have felt that way. So I'm interested in hearing from the panel what your advice is on communicating the business case for the research and work that we want to bring from the university.
I'll go first and say, be short and sweet. Be really direct, have concrete examples, maybe a reference that we could go to together to say, hey, would you actually use this? How would you apply it? There's a lot of competition, and if you can be clear and concise and prove out the opportunity, you'll get interest.
If you don't ask, the answer is always no. And so don't take bad news is in a bad way. You just have to go out and talk to people, and most of the time the answer is no, and not because of something bad, but just we don't have the money to do it, or it's not aligned. But there are many times where I've been approached, and then I've sent them to someone else, and then 2 or 3 years later it all kind of comes back in some other random way you didn't expect. But if you didn't talk to me, I wouldn't have known. It wouldn't have happened. So you just have to talk to people.
And I think some of this is on us as Josh and I to think about how to make the business case. I don't think, and I mean, I train PhD students, some of them are sitting out here, like have done really deep tech. It doesn't mean they can always pick their head up and be like, oh, there's an insurance benefit if I'm using something less hazardous. And so some of that is really on us to help guide in the ecosystem that Josh has built of being able to frame a business case, not as a PhD chemist or engineer, but what is the systems view of that?
I was going to add one more thing. I think another thing that to think about is, when you teach in a class, if you're a professor, you always have to take a step back and think, because I had this problem when I was a professor. You've taught the class 5 times, and you think, oh my God, we've done this 5 times. Shouldn't you know this already? And so you have to take that step back and put yourself in the mind of the student and remember that this is the first time they're seeing it, and you have to kind of bring them along for the ride. That exact same skill when talking to people translates 110%, right? Just remember, we might not know what you know, and it's got to be a conversation, but you kind of got to put yourself in my mind that I don't know what you work on, and so you have to explain it in a way that I can understand and kind of bring me along and get me excited about what it is you're doing.
Just to put some more specifics on what Julie was alluding to in terms of the resources that are available to people in the Yale community. If you're a faculty member, you're working in a faculty lab, we have a platform called Venture Lab, which will bring you in and we'll connect you. We'll run a workshop, a 90-minute workshop with 3 or 4 experts from your industry, your domain, to talk about what are the questions on your mind, whether it's business model, whether it's real world application, any number of topics, and really help think about the next set of questions that you're going to need to find answers to advance to whatever the next milestone might be. So feel free to reach out to us on that. If you're a student working on your own idea, there's a lot of resources around Yale as well. Sci-City is the student home for innovation. Cassie Tucker's here. Cassie can give a wave. She's the interim executive director at Sci-City, and there's a number of wonderful programs there that can help our students develop their ideas, think about business cases, applications, get connected to mentorship. So if you're part of the Yale community, there's a real wealth of resources available to help you think through those issues if you're looking for help. Other questions?
I heard you say a couple times about it being competitive? And I would give it a yes and, because the bottom line is if any one company has a solution to climate change and only they know it, we are not going to get there at scale and the speed that we need. So I would presumptuously say you can be beyond just pre-competitive, and bringing competitors together to solve real world problems also has tremendous value. So what you're doing is unbelievable, but I would say I wouldn't limit yourself. You guys could make it happen.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm at a development bank, and so I work with corporates in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and North Africa. We've seen that that it's really hard to spur innovation with our financing, and we've also seen that companies that have existing university partnerships tend to be more innovative, tend to be at the forefront of climate action within their industry. Is there a way that funders or governments or other actors can incentivize more collaboration between industry and universities? Maybe you already covered this, so sorry if you did.
I mean, I will put on my old, government EPA hat and say there's all kinds of levers if nations or nation states wanted to encourage this, right? There's R&D tax credits, there's patent life extension, there's all kinds of policy levers that could be pulled to encourage the behavior you want to see. It's just, a question of where does this fall on the agenda of what people are working on in terms of policy right now. But absolutely, there are levers that could be pulled.
Hi, I'm Kathy Lynch. I'm with Yale. This may not be exactly the answer, but even though we've talked about this consortium as an industry academic partnership, clearly, I know both Toyota and IBM, you have partnerships with NGOs around the world to enact different things that you're working on. And we have faculty who have relationship with NGOs or governmental organizations. And so part of what we will be thinking about is how to bring those sectors into these conversations as well. Because it's not simply a bi-directional partnership, but it's how to expand, because we need those sectors. So I just wanted to mention that as well. It hasn't come up yet.
Hi, thank you all. Brian, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your professor to Toyota journey, and I assume it makes you very good at what you're currently doing. I'm kind of just like thinking more about that.
I don't know. Is there like a bar we could go to? It's a longer story. I mean, for me personally, it wasn't a planned career move. I thought I would just be a professor, and then, you do it for a while, and then you wonder, okay, well, I guess is this all there is? You have a bit of the midlife crisis, and the opportunity at Toyota, it just kind of came about the right time. And, originally it was my original role actually wasn't full-time. It was I was dual capped for a couple of years, and it was really to set up this new program that Toyota wanted to do with universities. So it was much more like kind of setting up the program, and as a program kind of research manager, a bit like maybe like a ARPA-E type program was what we were going after. And then at some point I realized I had two jobs and this was crazy, and decided it was time to pick one, right? So it was not a engineered career move by any means. But I have not regretted it at all. It's been really wonderful, and it's kind of nice to do something similar, but and leverage some of those old things you used to do, but completely new as well.
But you really miss teaching.
So and it kind of goes back. It is the one transferable skill, because as kind of an R&D manager, part of your job actually is teaching and explaining to executives in Toyota why they should continue to fund these kind of things. Because there is always this natural tension in business that, we're in business to make money, and that's what pays for everything. And there's always a crisis, and there's always, some short-term thing that we have to deal with. And the first tendency is to pull back on the long-term stuff. And I'm lucky to work for a company that thinks long-term, and that's not the first reaction. But you always got to fight that tension. And it's kind of like you were saying, the storytelling as well is important, because you can't draw direct lines of direct return on investment very easily.
Hi, thank you for this. As a early career or still doing my PhD student, I was just wondering if maybe Brian and Michael, you could speak to thinking about going into academia versus industry rather than talking about collaborating between the two and trying to figure out where you can make the most impact doing something like I do climate change psychology. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about deciding to go into academia and then leverage those partnerships, or maybe just go straight into the industry and try to make a change from within. Whatever you could say about that would be great.
First, you go first.
Sure, it feels like you'll have more value. So I am a very biased person in this. I'm the son of an academic. And so I saw up close all the way through my life what that life is like, and it's a great life, and he's still doing it. And I slept in my childhood bedroom this week so that I could be closer to this action. So it is super important, and I feel like a mission-driven person, and universities by definition are that, so no shame in any game here. I've been really excited by the opportunities to get closer to where things have been applied. And so my career has been in government or in industry, in places where, in particular, those two sectors come together, where you can develop and implement. But we can't do this alone. I've already talked about university opportunities. So, and I should also say there are plenty of very applied programs within universities too. I mentioned extension services as just one such example. I think community law clinics in another field would be another great example. So this is not an either or. I will say that I have found a wealth of really diverse opportunity in applied senses in industry, and in some ways, even more so in government. And there is nothing that precludes you in those roles from collaborating with researchers or universities elsewhere.
So I don't know how much this bias exists anymore, but when I was a PhD student, there was this kind of thinking that, only really creative work was done in universities and industry works on boring things. And that's couldn't be further from the truth. There are extraordinarily talented people behind these companies that you often don't appreciate. So I think as a PhD student, I would say don't be dismissive of how innovative and how hardworking and, essentially, like Nobel Prize worthy work is often done kind of behind the scenes, really, really great work. On the other side of it, though, when you work for a company, Toyota, at the end of the day, we make cars and everything comes back to the car and you're part of a team. And so there's great things of being part of a team, but it also means as a researcher, you might not have the same independence building your own agenda, kind of doing the thing that you're really passionate about doing because that might not align with the business. And maybe you can be misaligned for a little while, but not forever. And so there's kind of trade-offs. So there's great things of being part of a team, but some people like playing individual sports too.
Say one other thing that I think Yale does really well. We actually, as faculty, get 1 day a week that you're not obligated to do work back to the university. So you want to go consult, you want to work at your startup with your students, you want to volunteer. So you still have a lot of flexibility if you find the right. I just worry academia gets painted with a really broad brush. There's lots of different kinds of universities and higher education institutions.
Yeah, I've observed too in the time I've been back at Yale that I think there is a trend towards further blurring the line a little bit, I think too, between academia and industry. There's industries now where, like think of AI, for example, right? Like the research that's going on, the frontier research that's going on in AI is largely led by these hyperscalers that are deploying capital at a level that no university could ever dream of, right? And so there will be cases where that may be the interesting place to be engaged. And likewise, Yale has to think about, right, are we comfortable having arrangements where maybe it's more than 1 day a week that we're gonna have our faculty wearing an industry hat or collaborating with industry in some way, and vice versa. We hear from companies as well that want to dedicate some of their staff or some of their team to spend a dedicated chunk of time, collaborating with investigators at Yale on certain projects. So I sense that we're trending in that direction where there'll be more fluid movement between academia and private sector, which should open up interesting new opportunities as well.
Just want to add one comment is that this is not, I don't think it's a binary or yes and either or question, because so like, you're getting a PhD and essentially what, of course you're getting advanced knowledge in this little bit in terms of whole body or human knowledge, but what you actually gain is apart from the problem, independent thinking, your problem solving, all these are essential skills very valuable at the companies. So we have postdocs. I have a wonderful postdoc working with me doing climate change projection model, looking at ozone pollution impacting human health. And she did that in 8 months, and then tell me, I'm more interested in applying these skills to supply chain sustainability. And she went to Amazon and worked at their sustainability officer. And we have other PhD students similarly have very talented, and then they work on epidemiological analysis. And then they decided to work with Pfizer on their vaccine. You know what happened? In 2020, when they had the vaccine ready, she was part of a team contributing to that. So you talk about real world impact, and that's combine your knowledge, combine your skills, combine all the things you have get trained for the PhD. So I think it's not whether you can only go to academia or industry. I think the skills you get trained in great institutions like Yale help you better prepare to either career. Yeah.
Hi there, my name is Mark Felinsky. I think sometimes about the valley of death around technologies, right? In a time when we need a lot of new climate tech to emerge on the scene, we're still experiencing a lot of times when these technologies can't scale. And so I would love to hear more about how the collaborations that exist between industry and academia kind of bridge this gap, like what kind of risks are taken on by each side, and how working together kind of reduces some of those risks.
It's a really big question. And honestly, I don't think that I'm the expert on it. But I would just say from my experience, to be honest with you, many of the projects that I've been a part of with universities have had very little risk for the university. The projects have been highly selective in how they've come about. So that's an opportunity that is not common. But at a place like IBM, especially when we're practicing this type of philanthropy, which is co-creation of technology and implementation for universities' identified goals, oftentimes we're treating the university like a customer. And we're coming in and we're building to spec as they define it and providing recommendations through design thinking and other practices for how to optimize it and account for some of the considerations that you might be thinking of. Elsewhere, of course, I think especially when there are really significant financial investments by a university in, say, shared hardware environments, obviously there's more on the line. In IBM, we're starting to see a lot of opportunity around this in the quantum computing space, where we have what we call discovery accelerators with major universities, typically with government backing them, where there is really significant investment in both capital and labor to take that on. And that's a brand new tech. We are building that plane as we fly it. So there, I think there's a lot more risk. On the corporate side, I'm not trying to say that there's a ton of risk in these, but certainly in my world, we're really proud of the university partnerships, and we make a big deal about them. We try to do this stellar storytelling because we think that it attracts more resources for the work, for the university, for interest in the type of work that we do and our brand. And so if we've made a bad bet on a vision that's been proposed by academia, and that's egg on our face in some ways. And typically for the level of investment that we've made, that's actually a worse outcome. right? The public reputational concerns, once we've made a really big deal about this trusted partnership, that can be a tougher conversation than, say, we invested X amount of money and ultimately the tech didn't prove out.
I have maybe a sense of the risk from our perspective, right? The things that I worry about from a risk perspective is that we don't do everything we can to give this work that's been done the chance to have an impact in the world, right? Like the deal with society is like we take a lot of grants in, right? We do a lot of work, do a lot of research. A lot of that research is funded by the taxpayers or other grantees, and if that work only results in a paper in a journal, as Kai suggests, that maybe is lightly read, that's a failure, right? Like we need to be giving the technologies that have a chance to have real world impact get out there. And I think your reference to the value of death is something we really focus on a lot, and is the reason we've been driving this strategy around accelerators, because we see that value of death very clearly in terms of where these federal grants will often leave off and where venture capitalists or industry partners may not be ready yet to make a bet on that technology. They want to see more proof points. They want to see a prototype. They want to see more experimental data. And so these accelerators aim to fill that void. And so that's why we're so excited about the Planetary Solutions Impact Accelerators. We will have a vehicle now to make grants, research grants, to do that prototyping work, to do that, advance that technology to the point where hopefully it is investable, or it is something that a corporate partner would find attractive, and not just the money that supports that work, but also the resources that we pack in around it with industry experts, student associates to work on the projects, all of the other support and guidance that we provide. So that value of death is very real, but that's one of the areas Yale, I think, is trying to be very progressive, is to think about the things that we can do within our mission to shrink that gap and hopefully get more technologies out into the world.
Saw her first, so I'm gonna go. Hi, my name is Stasha Santafort, and I work at Deloitte, leading our work around social impact, sustainability, net zero. And so I've been in a lot of sessions this week with, for example, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or this morning we were with WWF's Corporate Business Network, speaking with the likes of folks from SBTI and Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And I could go on and on, Goals House, et cetera, the various sectors all coming together. And there's so much that corporates just simply, how are we going to do this, right? There's so much space for innovation, for new, as we think about AI, how do we account for those emissions? What does it even look like? What is the methodology? So I love what you're talking about, this initiative. And my question to you, or sort of starter for future conversation, is, well, how are you connecting in with the business consortia, which are sort of the think tanks for coming together for cross-industry collaboration? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there because they're already convening the leading businesses, but at very early stage.
So at Toyota, we engage in a lot of these things because they're really critical. So when we think about net zero for Toyota, so our emissions profile, if we were a country, would be about number 10 in the world. So there's about 150 million Toyotas on the planet. So all this is roughly 500 million tons of CO2 if you look at the whole system. Within our boundary, if you do the classic scope 1, 2, 3, a negligible amount is scope 1 and 2, and it's all scope 3. So it's all driving the cars and all the parts that come in to make the cars from other suppliers. So it's actually, none of this stuff is actually in our direct control by that classic accounting. So these kind of thinkings and bringing in kind of the right ways to share this and do this together and do all the accounting is super critical. I don't think we have an answer yet, but it's a really hard thing for us, again, because it takes so much to make all these cars that everything comes from everywhere, and our direct control is not that much, to be honest.
I think just on the other point, and again, I'm like, this is amazing work that Yale does. We are the only knowledge partner to the WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So WBCSD brings leaders to Yale's campus for training at our School of Management. We do executive ed. We engage on topic specifics. We bring faculty expertise to WBCSD. And so we keep looking for places to show up as the education partner. What's the leading edge? What are new methodologies? What's the new finance accounting vehicles? The social cost of carbon? And so I think, again, like, what's our lane? What's unique about Yale? And what do we have to bring to these consortium? And so we're looking for those partnerships and dialogues, but we've been really fortunate to show up as the knowledge partner in many of those circles.
So I think we have time for one more question before I'll invite our panelists to offer any closing thoughts over here.
Hello, my name is Margot. I work a lot in content, the thought leadership strategy for some of my clients that are in the aviation industry.
I'm sorry, which industry?
Aviation. So mobility. So we're talking a lot about like storytelling and stakeholder engagement. So what do you think are the biggest communication gaps between the private and the public sector, and how would you address these gaps?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question. Do you mean the biggest gaps in terms of how the private sector and public sector practice storytelling? Do you mean in terms of the content in them? Can you say a little more?
Yeah, I think just how they practice storytelling with each other and with the end consumer. So that is a broad question, so feel free to answer it in whichever way you want to answer it.
I mean, at this moment, it's been really clear that universities, higher ed in America writ large has not done a good job telling the value proposition of what we do in terms of social value and social benefit. I think private sector has a different relationship because they're selling something and we're customers, and so the storytelling is much more direct. It gets at what was being said about these are intangible. We're training people, we're doing research. Can you connect the dot from this project in a university to a health outcome, to carbon actually removed from the atmosphere? And so I think this has been really challenging, and it's become really evident that universities need to do a better job of telling these stories and claiming credit for things that we've initiated and where they've wound up. And we're going to be forced to do that and learn how to do it.
I'll just say, I think it's a super interesting question, and I don't have an answer to it. I will just say that at IBM, we do a ton of work with the public sector, both on a commercial basis. The US federal government is a massive client. Many US states are, of course, other countries too. And then in both the research and social impact lanes, we also have a lot of collaboration. We've had some great wins in storytelling along those lines. We created a geospatial foundation model for weather and climate with NASA and open sourced that. And that was a massive story for us last year. And we're applying that for a lot of use cases with universities through the IBM Impact Accelerator. My sense is that that story lived on the merits and the brand of NASA, and that where we have tried to do more tactical storytelling with other public sector agencies who are genuinely using our products, whether paying for it or not, both cultural differences and then also reasonable restrictions on what governments can say that could appear to be advocacy for corporate products makes it hard for them to really participate. So we just generally end up with both greater ambition and flexibility from a storytelling perspective. And you see that come through in the nature of what comes out. We're just more dynamic because we're able to do more. Yeah. Yep.
I just said in Watson gets to win Jeopardy, so IBM always has a great story.
Didn't get to win. Won. Hold on.
All right, before I ask our panelists for any closing thoughts, I mentioned earlier some of the programs and resources at Yale that exist to support our faculty and student innovators. I noticed a couple other people in the audience here that I should acknowledge. First, there's an amazing program called the Yale Center for Business and the Environment, CBAE. Stu DeQ, the executive directors in the back, Josie Jayworth here in the front. Amazing program spanning environment, business, wide range of services and supports for our students and faculty. Also, Jenny Frederick, who's my colleague in the Provost's office, leads the Poorview Center for Teaching and Learning, but is also helping lead Yale's AI strategy. So if you're doing anything related to AI, you're going to want to get to know Jenny at some point. So we're going to wrap it up there. I wanted just to see if anyone had any closing thoughts, words of wisdom to share with our audience to summarize and send us on our way. Maybe I set the bar too high there. Any closing thoughts?
Okay. Well, I think it kind of related to the last question. One of the things when we talk about health, what we talk about is always health should be part of the solution and it should be centered around the solution to motivate the people. But then in terms of everything what we do in academia, it's generally towards public, translate the finding to communicate what we do and the finding the meaning. And this week, during the Climate Week one event, I heard saying that actually communication is the solution. So actually, my closing thought is that the way that we do here, the fact that we in this room have this dialogue with private sector, academia, students, I think that gave me confidence that we are doing that. I'm hoping that we're going to do a better job year after year. Yeah.
So despite the rise of Watson and AI, people still matter and relationships still matter. And so I would say, for building these kind of partnerships, you really have to, it really involves a lot of that personal relationships and trust building and working together as a team. These are complicated problems. No one person has the answer. There is no one answer. So we really need to work together as a team. And so really, to do that, those relationships and networks matter a lot.
I think, there's a lot of universities that have climate and sustainability, the Climate Project, lots of different ways universities frame this. I think that our provost, Scott Strobel in Yale, framed this as Planetary Solutions, says so much about the orientation of this campus and this community to actually bringing solutions to the real world. It says everything about what Yale is doing and how we're thinking about these issues.
I'll just close by saying I've been in countless of these events that have emphasized the power of partnerships. It's almost the most trite thing that you could say at such a conference. One thing I've really appreciated about this discussion is that we've been talking about ways to break through, because just having a cross-sector partnership does not do that. So the power of storytelling, the power of differentiation, having a moonshot-like ambition, like a solution to climate change. I think that's super important, and I commend the organizers here for enabling a conversation like that. And I wish that more events started with that, because we all know we need to work together. We all know universities and corporations and government need to work together. So what is that differentiation that we can enable together? Good on you all for having an event that talks about that.
Wonderful. Perfect place to wrap up. Please join me in thanking our panelists for a wonderful discussion.